I can't help but be curious. I'm in one of the previous worlds I generated just exploring the Nether. There's a really gross biome that has blood on it, and the Nether's actually a lot worse with the pitch black darkness mod I have. Because anything that has a that doesn't have good enough light level is just pitch black in the Nether as well. Even though the Nether is supposed to have ambient light. Which is really bad. Anyway, yeah, the Nether is an even more dangerous place now. Yeah, light level 0 is still absolute darkness. Anyway, I really want to know what the Nether looks like. Or not the Nether, the end.
Good, better and better Hydra units just keep coming out, and Mona still has some good stuff. She
Let's
still
go
has good
explore it in
buffing,
creative
but
mode
her
together.
best thing was Freeze, and Freeze is sort of the worst thing Hydra was doing lately, but still not a bad character. Next is going to be Chi-Chi, and with Farina, Chi-Chi can kind of do some stuff. You can be an on-fielder, you can build her for physical damage, use Aquila Pavonia, and use physical damage normal attacks, and that buff from Farina not only does the buff, this is the cool thing, is if you want, you can actually build a hybrid physical cryo build, not necessarily for Chi-Chi, because she doesn't do all that much cryo damage, but you could build attack percent goblet, and so if you're using a hybrid physical elemental character, Farina's all-type damage bonus buff will work both for physical and for elemental. But anyways, Chi-Chi's best use right now is as an on-fielder for Farina teams, and you can use 3 offensive characters, something like Farina, Yelan, Kazuha, and you're going to get a bit of freeze, which is really nice for crowd control, and just that broken double Hydro core with Kazuha to shred resistances. You know, you can use her with Hyper Bloom. She would be higher, but her elemental application is very low. She doesn't have any form of buffing, and even her off-field healing has a lot of downtime, pretty inconsistent, and it's not really a team-wide heal, so it doesn't work amazingly with Farina. But again, if you have her on field, then she does have that spot. Next is going to be Fremine, another character that I haven't fully built up, mostly because I don't have a C6 or anywhere near it yet. I've heard some people say that he reaches Eula's level, and from the numbers I've seen, he doesn't quite. From what I've heard people say, it's mostly people just really want to hate on Eula. I think the biggest thing going for Fremine is how well he synergizes with Hyper Bloom, and the biggest downside for Fremine is how much better other characters synergize with Hyper Bloom. So although he can get his shatters, and although he does get some nice buffs from using Farina Hyper Bloom that boost his personal damage on those teams, he doesn't contribute a crazy amount, but the teams overall perform very well. I have 36 Star at the Abyss with my level 1 Fremine, so just imagine if you actually build him. I think the biggest thing that I don't like about him is how his teams are mostly single target, but his shatter passive requires shattering, which is inherently not a boss mechanic because bosses can't be frozen to shatter. So overall, sadly, an under-designed kit, and I really hope it means we get physical buffing characters in the future. I think it's coming. Wait for it. I think Animo Z is actually pretty solid. This is one of those characters in a vacuum. You might even be able to get away with rating Animo Z up here, but I think Animo overall is less necessary than it used to be, and there's more and more free-to-play options for Animo, like Lynette. I think the burst is really annoying, but, you know, having VV, having Animo, Shred, all-type elemental shred, further shredding on top of VV is nice, but these days, yes, you use Animo for the VV, but to really truly justify an Animo on your team, most of the time you want them for something else as well, whether it's Kazuha's elemental damage buff and grouping, Sucrose's EM buff and grouping, Venti's grouping. You're looking for something in addition to just that VV. Otherwise, you might just play double Hydra, you might just play Hyper Bloom, you might just play something that doesn't even require VV. So I think that the ask for Animo these days is higher than it used to be, but Animo Steve's still pretty decent if you want to run them. Next is Diona. People got super mad at me for underrating Diona, and now I'm bringing them even lower, which you might think is very surprising because, hey, with Dendro, her elemental and mastery buff is more valuable, and with Fontaine, healing is more valuable for Farina. The problem is, this elemental mastery buff that she gives, you don't really run. It only gives elemental mastery to the active character, first of all, and the character that really wants the elemental mastery is usually not even on field, and you don't really want to be running a cryo character, especially a cryo healer, on Dendro teams. You normally want it to be Kuki or your Dendro unit to be your healer because Dendro is the more valuable element. So wasting your cryo slot for healing, really, really not a good idea. She's not best in slot on any teams anymore. Again, tier 3, still, these are solid units, so it's not like I think she's awful. It's just that versus other characters, versus Layla, versus Charlotte, that's the next part, right, is Farina really wants a full party healer. Diona can only heal one at a time, and her healing ticks are pretty slow, her shield is pretty weak, the elemental mastery buffing is useless for most of the teams that you actually want to use her on. The only time I can actually see it being useful is on Ayaka freeze team where you're using Kazuha or a mono cryo team. She buffs Kazuha's elemental mastery, making his damage bonus slightly bigger. But yeah, she's okay. She's still fine, right? Like again, tier 3 still solid units, but definitely not one that I recommend you build it unless you just. Next is going to be Diluc, and I'm about to eat my words because there's going to be a character in the next patch that puts him, I guarantee he's like here or something after the next patch. We won't talk about why, we won't talk about what character, but I know I'm going to eat my words. I know he's going to be higher. The character's not out yet though. We'll have to wait until the end of Fontaine where I do my next tier list, 6 months or 7 months from now or whatever it ends up being, that Diluc will finally get his retribution. But for now, he still sits in tier 3. I don't think he's awful. If you really love Diluc, I will say this, if you really love Diluc, I've seen some clears that do put him here. I've seen some very, very impressive melt Diluc clears. Just go look it up. They're amazing. Blow my mind. But they're very hard to replicate. It requires a ton of game knowledge and skill, sort of like the Amber Melt stuff. If you love Diluc, you can make him here. But since it's not practical for most people, I'm going to put him here. I'm really excited for next patch where we get a character that's going to make him actually good. I'm stoked for it. And next is going to be Dea. Now, despite moving down in the placements, objectively she's gotten a lot better. I probably overrated her a bit, and also just the overall power of tier 3 has gone up because of Farina. It's really Dea's place in Novelette and many teams that warrant her being here. She's a solid unit, which is exactly what tier 3 is. I use her as a carry. As a carry, she's more over here. But on Novelette teams, they're definitely her best teams for that interruption resistance, for providing that pyro application, providing some occasional vapes. Her place on his Hyperbloom teams, on that kind of burning-ish stuff, they're actually excellent teams, like really, really excellent teams. I would just say that her contribution to those teams is not like super high, but Dea mains, rejoice that she at least is a really good support on those teams. If there's more characters that can use her like Linny and Novelette do, I could even see her moving up to here because supports are valuable. So time will tell whether she's like a somewhat niche support for these two characters or whether her slots will rise in the future. Next is going to be Yunjin moving down quite a bit. I had her in tier 2 because she was sort of a best in slot support for Yoimiya at the time. Nowadays with Farina, Yoimiya has new best teams, and yes, she is comfortable in double Geo along with Zhongli for Yoimiya, so it's a good comfort team. Arguably better than double Hydro with Yoimiya and Zhongli, double Hydro, double Hydro, single Geo, sorry. The fact that she's no longer best in slot, she only works really with 3 characters like Wander, Ayato, Yoimiya. She's really not best in slot for Wander, Ayato, not even close. And overall, she requires a lot of investment. But that being said, if you do have Wander, if you do have Ayato, if you do have Yoimiya, she is fun. I like her a lot. I think she's a solid unit. I've cleared the Abyss with all 3 of these characters using Yunjin, and I enjoy it. I think once you actually get her built, once you get her up and running, it's like, awesome, this team feels good. The problem is, why would I build a Yunjin when the off-field DPS options are just so much better? So, Yunjin, solid unit, but not really anything to write home about. I actually think I'm going to put her behind Dea. I think I might move Dea up a little bit, actually, thinking about it more. I'm actually going to put her at the top of tier 3 for now, just because of how good she is on that new blood team. I really like Sayu. I tested her a lot with Farina doing Sayu National. It was so fun, and it was so good. Really solid unit. It has to be on field, doesn't have grouping, so her healing is nowhere near that of Jean, so using her on-field healer and VV Shredder is not nearly as good as it was with Jean. But Sayu National with Farina is awesome.
I thought I wouldn't pause hands like that.
Quick Bloom with Farina. On-field Sayu with Farina is highly recommend doing it if you love Sayu. The teams aren't meta, there's way better options, but really, really fun. It just made me, if she also worked as an off-field healer for Farina, then it would be easy tier 2 or even tier 1, but having to be on-field really limits what you can overall do, but still really, really fun and really, really good. Next is Kujo Sara. I'm very sad to say that even before I was able to get my C6 Kujo Sara, she has been power crept to oblivion. She is no longer part of anyone's best team, no longer part of Raiden's best team, not at C0, not at C2, not with or without Engulfing Lightning. Farina has just completely power crept Kujo Sara, which is too bad. I wish. It almost feels like that they didn't allow Raiden to work with Beidou because they wanted Kujo Sara to be the best in slot support, and then they did, but what they should have done is just made Kujo Sara better. Let her work with Beidou, and then just made Kujo Sara a better character. But not only is she not the highest damage option and not highest DPS option for Hyper Raiden anymore, but she's also very clunky to use because other options with Raiden provide much more flexibility for rotations and multi-wave content. Kujo Sara makes it so you have a very big front load, which is nice, but if you ever need to do damage to multi-waves or multiple phases of the boss, it just becomes much clunkier. The opportunity for overkill is much higher. The flexibility is lower for the team as to what enemies they can face properly. Still strong for Raiden in particular, and only at C6. If you have her below she's C6, she's over here. So yeah, and maybe not even here. Maybe she's like down. So I will still be building her up quite a bit for screenshot damage for Raiden. I'm still pretty excited to get her C6 into player, but she's definitely fallen off as a top tier Electro support. And her short duration really limits her synergies. Yeah, even Yamiko, Sino, like anyone else, she just doesn't have synergy with. She kind of works with Kaching, but the other problem obviously is that Fischl is just generally way better. Beidou is better, even Lisa is better a lot of the time, so sad but true. Next is going to be Dori. Dori got pretty big blow up from Farina, using her as like a budget Sino. Farina, she's actually pretty solid. Next is Lynette, our resident free-to-play Anemo option. Basically, it's her lack of grouping that holds her back. Similar issues to the Anemo MC. Her best use is on a Wanderer or just any sort of Farazan team where you have C6 Farazan. You can use her on-field as a driver at C6, but you kind of really need her C6 to make that work. She's good. She's solid. Anemo is a good element, but again, these days you need more than just a good element to be above. That makes her solid, right? She's a solid unit. Next, we have Barbara. Barbara's best use is still on a Nilou team, where she could build EM and still heal enough, especially with Sacrifags and from her burst. It's still one of Nilou's better options, especially for free-to-plays. Unfortunately, her synergy with Farina is very limited because, unlike Kokomi, she can't do damage and do big heals at the same time. If you want to do damage, you need to do attack. If you want to do healing, you need to build HP. So overall, she doesn't get the hugest power jump, but she's still a solid character, so still tier 3. Next is going to be Dendro main character. Providing Dendro is still valuable, but these days, at least for me, it's not enough to get you into the very good unit spot. It's only enough to get you into a solid unit spot. Still solid in Hyper Bloom, still solid in Virgin, still solid in all those other things, but there's just so many other units that do better things. Despite me putting them right beside each other, I do substantially like Kali better than Dendro main character. The thing that impressed me most about Kali, I didn't end up releasing my Kali guide because I got busy doing other things, but I did test her out a lot, and I was really impressed by how well she worked as a Nahida replacement, as a Hyper Bloom driver at C6, and with her buffs, with everything going on, she's actually a really good unit and applies a lot of Dendro. You can use her with Sacrificial Bow as a free-to-play, or Elegy for the End if you've got some 5-star ones. I'm actually going to move her up higher up, closer to where Dea is going to be at the top of tier 3, because I actually think that Kale is a pretty underrated and pretty good unit, actually, especially when you get those higher constellations that you don't need. You you can still build her up at C0. She also is arguably the ceiling option still to this day for Nilou Bloom teams. I tend to choose Baiju for a more comfy option. I think Kale is a character that you could even make a case for being in tier 2, but before I put her up there, I'm going to do a lot more testing with her, just make sure that it's not just my own hype. But I think that tier 3, at the top of tier 3, is very respectable place for Kale and very fair. Next is going to be Candace. I definitely think I overrated Candace on my last tier list. I think I was just more overcompensating for the fact that people thought she was so bad, but I think she's a solid unit. She's a solid free-to-play Hydra, especially when you get high constellations, if you happen to get them. I recently got C6, so I'm excited to try her out and see if that changes my opinion, but I think as long as you have C1, she's definitely a tier 3 character. She's definitely carried by Nilou, but she is good on Nilou teams. She's very good, and I think she is solid on other teams that need Hydro. But he's obviously going to be outclassed every time by Xingqiu Yelan. But those are the best characters of the game, so I think tier 3 is very solid and very fair. Next is a triple whammy of Chongyun, Kaya, and Rosaria. Chongyun's a character that I definitely underrated. If going by my last tier list metrics, he would definitely be in tier 2. As of late, the value of a cryo DPS has gone down a lot, but reverse melds is still excellent. Mono cryo Chongyun is still excellent. If you want to hear my full thoughts on Chongyun, I did a guide very recently on him, and he is awesome to play. His front load is awesome.
Let me try Slash Load. I just remembered.
I really fought hard with myself to not, I really wanted to put these characters in the tier above.
Really?
It was very hard to separate tier 3 and 2, but I think that these characters, they're solid, but they're not very, very good. Kaya here as well basically gives more sustained damage, but lower damage, more energy as a support for someone like Ayaka. Rosaria is kind of the highest damage ceiling out of the 3, definitely the best of the 3, but not by that much. You can kind of build whoever you want. Gives a crit rate buff or buff snapshots. Her downside is that her damage is all in one place, so if you got really mobile enemies, you can't freeze them, or if they're mobile, you're going to have a hard time doing all of the damage that she has to offer. Next is going to be Razor. I think his Virgin team is still really good. Again, check out my Razor video if you want to see more. But it uses Nahida, C6, Bennett, Xingqiu, some of the most high-valued teams and characters in the game. I often if I pick that team struggling to pick another team on the other side, you can just make better teams with these units. He's definitely being carried, which is fine. He still does stuff on the team. It's still really cool. It's still pretty good. He's still solid, but he's not really bringing that team up. He's sort of more holding it down. But if you love Razor and you want to use him on field, that team is awesome and super fun. Next is Hazo. Similar to Lynette, similar to Animo MC, Animo's a great element. I think him having to be on field, not having a ton of grouping, it just limits his synergies a lot. And he ends up being an on-fielder, he basically becomes the bottleneck for his teams. I think you could make an argument for him being in very good unit as a Taser driver or Aggravate driver or something like that. I think Taser is just pretty good though. I don't think Taser is a super insane team. I think there's better things you can be doing as an Aggravate driver. I think that his potential as a hyper carry is just limited because of his 4-star scaling. So I think he's solid. I think he's a solid unit. I think this is where he belongs. And then obviously we already put moved Kale up. We've got Dea here. And then top of the tier is going to be Layla. I think that it's really tough. A lot of these characters, Layla, basically in the same thing as Dea, is that on Novelette teams, she feels amazing on Novelette teams. The resistance to interruption that she provides, the extra frozen reaction, she's pretty good on Wanderer teams as well, if you can get that cryo infusion consistently, which I've had a bit of trouble doing, but if you can get it. She also provides that normal and charge attack buff at C4. She's really good on mono cryo. She gives a lot of damage. I could easily see Layla and maybe Dea, maybe Kale. These are characters that are kind of flirting with the edge of being part of tier 2. I'm going to leave them at the top of tier 3, but just know that I do think very highly of these characters. It's just that I guess it's kind of niche. Their performance versus other options is either only very nichely better or slightly worse, but I think that these are very, very solid characters, and obviously the lower ones are just solid and the higher ones are starting to be really quite good. But Layla's got a great thick shield. She actually does good personal damage, especially if you have her C6. I know Mono Crow with Ayaka, Shenhe, Layla, Kazuha is not very popular. I happen to love it, but I'm kind of in the minority there. But I think because of her synergy with Novelette, she's still a very solid unit. Moving on to tier 2, we have Mika. Mika is a character that I like a lot more in theory than I like in practice. In theory, he provides great heals, he provides cryo, he provides attack speed. So even if you're not at C6 providing that damage buff for someone like Eula, at least for someone like Wanderer and, on a Farina team, he's providing that healing, some freeze for crowd control utility, some attack speed for Wanderer. Should be quite good. In practice, his healing isn't insane. He needs a lot of ER, and it just feels a little bit scuffed. If we were to go by personal feel, I would rather switch him with Layla, put him down at tier 3 and put Layla up in tier 2. It also feels a bit, I don't know, I feel like Layla might just deserve to be up here anyways. What the heck, this is my tier list. I think Layla's better than Mika. Even with Farina Sumi, I think that Mika's healing is not quite good enough to be really, really comfortable. But no, I'm gonna try and be unbiased, because I think that if you build Mika properly with higher investment, and really get those heals going, that he is a good character with Wanderer. But then again, there's the interruption resistance. It's hard, really, really hard. Let me know what you think. Eula is next. She definitely is better than she was before with Farina teams, but the teams feel substantially worse than other Farina teams. So although she's in the best spot she's been with, synergy with Mika, with Farina, she really needs that pure, dedicated, physical, off-field damage dealer, support, whatever. I personally still think it's going to come one day, but it's not here yet. She's definitely my least favorite limited 5-star. Every time I use her, I'm disappointed. I've even crowned her burst. I'm gonna level 90 her. I'm gonna make a whole. I'm gonna try again for Eula, but every time I try and use her, it just feels very lacking. I think that if you invest highly into her, you get her, her good constellations, even just her early ones. She starts to perform a bit better. You hyper min-max into vertical investment, but at that point, you could just be hyper investing into Farina instead. So it's tough. I think next is going to be Goro. Goro and Ito, they have gotten some buffs from Farina. I will say I haven't built Ito yet because I don't have him yet. He hasn't re-ran since I started my YouTube channel, so I haven't had the opportunity to get him. As soon as he comes out, I'll be maxing him. I hear from Ito mains that he's underrated, so maybe it's a case of his numbers not looking that impressive on a sheet, but he actually feels really good to play, and he actually does, really consistent clears when you're actually using him. If that's the case, I'll update, him by the time we get. Surely he'll rerun by the end of Fontaine, so I'll be able to build him and test him out. For now, this is where I have him. I think the biggest thing that holds him back, and I didn't really talk about what I dislike about Eula, but it's kind of the same thing for both of them, is they both have decent AoE, which is great, but the problem is neither of them have synergy with animal units like Hawk. And because they don't have synergy with these animal units that can group, their AoE often feels very bad, because you can't really take advantage of it. If enemies are a bit too spread out, you basically have no AoE, and their damage is sort of based on the fact that they do have pretty solid AoE. So it's like they're AoE characters, but can't use the best AoE characters actually support them. If Animo could shred Geo, even just a little bit, even if it was only 20% instead of the whole 40% or something like that, and same with physical, these characters would be way better, because you could actually run them with a grouper and not lose a ton of damage. Ito also does have the issue that his teams are very expensive. You want him, you want Ito, you want Goro, you want Zhongli, you want Albedo, and these are characters that you normally really want, or at least Albedo and C6 Goro. So I think it might be the case, though, that dedicated Ito mains, they've gone out and got his weapon. They've gotten maybe his C1 or his C2.
It certainly looks better, but I don't know. I still think this is kind of lame.
He's tier 1 character, right?
They replace the hallways with blocky room transitions like this.
That Ito mains are biased, but I think it's also possible that I just haven't got him yet, and in practice he feels better than he looks on the sheets. So on the sheets, he doesn't look super, super impressive. And Goro, basically, yeah, he works with Noelle, but Noelle's best teams aren't with Goro anymore anyways.
Very cool.
And so he's basically just an Ito.
I just realized
he's still really good. Especially since he buffs both Ito and Albedo on that team.
Made the
Next is Albedo, also hasn't rerun since I started my channel. He's gotten a bit better because he now works with Navia. I still think that Zhongli is the preferred, from what I've seen, Zhongli is still the preferred Geo for that team because of the res shred and interrupter resistance. Crystallize just pretty unreliable. But I think if you're able to play perfectly, then Albedo technically is the damage ceiling. So maybe he does belong higher. But for now, I'm going to have him here. But I think that it's nice, at least, that he has another team. I think the biggest problem that holds Albedo back is he just messed up his burst. His burst doesn't really do anything. They really need to rework Crystallize and make it scale better off of Elemental Mastery so that his buff actually means something. I think that'd be a pretty cool thing for them to do. really happy with that. It's like they buffed Hydro Resonance, like Hydro Resonance of all things, like the most broken element. So surely they can buff Crystallize a little bit. Surely. He's also a solid, decent flex pick in just double Geo teams with double Hydro, double Geo. But I think that the double Geo core is just getting used less and less and less as we have more and more good off-field supports, such as Farina, etc. Next is Yanfei. Yanfei is a character that I haven't built up super huge myself, but I played on my friend's account who has a really well-listed Yanfei, and I was very impressed. Her damage was only slightly lower than Yoimiya, but having her own built-in interruption resistance is like super awesome. And even if you don't build enough ER to get, I think that's the biggest thing that holds her back, is you need to build a lot of ER to actually get her burst every rotation. But I really like her. I think she's a completely viable option if you want to pyro DPS and you just want to, you don't want to get Hu Tao, or you don't want to build Zhang Lang or something. You can use her with double Hydro Bennett, with
it's
Jean.
much more convenient if I just do this.
A double swirl setup you can do with Jean and Farina. I haven't seen anyone talk about it, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's out there. You can use her as a shield bot, but I think that there's sort of better options for shields these days. So she's mostly up here just on her merit as a DPS, which is pretty impressive. Kaching was my very first 5-star, and I still like her a lot. As an aggravate driver,
I wish
Quick Bloom with
Kaching was
Farina,
my
she's
first
generally
5-star.
relegated to being just an on-fielder. But again, these are very good units, right? This tier is very good units.
My
If you want
first
to see my
5-star
full
was
thoughts of
Chi-Chi.
Kaching, check out my Kaching guide. Her ability to be quick swappy, her burst having a super low energy cost and a big AoE means you can spam it very easily and get lots of iframes. In the past, I said that you could use her teams without a healer, and that would sort of bring up the overall power of Kaching teams. Nowadays, the Abyss has been very aggressive, and I think it's pretty much impossible to get away without a defensive option for most people. So I think she's stuck squarely in tier 2. Very good as an aggravate driver, but there's lots of options, and one of the options is a free character you get, Lisa. I made an awesome guide on Lisa that you should definitely check out. It did not do that well, but you all have Lisa. You all should watch that guide. It's really, really good. But the fact that she can be both an on-field aggravate driver as well as an off-field spread support for Alhaitham, who's one of the best carries in the entire game. The Lisa spread teams felt amazing. The Lisa Quick Bloom, Lisa Quicken, her Ascension stat being Elemental Mastery. She's just great. She's a great character, and you get it for free. So the only reason I have her above Kaching is because of her off-field potential to be used with Alhaitham. If rated as both aggravate drivers, I would much prefer Kaching. I just find her playstyle much smoother and easier to use and more iframes, but Lisa is a great option as well. And again, next is going to be Yoimiya. I love Yoimiya. She is my most used character for on-fielders, period, because I never take her off my overworld team. She's incredible. I love her auto-targeting. There's a bunch of things that people underrate with Yoimiya is that her ability to not have to dash to get close to enemies saves her valuable time in the Abyss. So things like the Mangukenki dashing around, the Mirror Maiden moving around, any enemies that move, she really saves you time that isn't encapsulated on the sheet. If she had decent, even halfway decent, even slightly passable AoE, I would move her up to tier 1, 100%, but the fact that she's fully single target locked keeps her to tier 2 for me. I think she's very strong. It also doesn't help that her best teams are shielding-less teams, which a lot of people don't like. I have gotten used to them now. The Ape with I love double unfortunately,
he gets summoned.
Single target lock keeps her from being in tier 1.
Ooh,
I do think she's
I don't think I can do the bad strap.
She's strong enough that she's really, really good. But if there's ever those abysses where it's a mix of single target and AoE, which right now we've had a couple single target straight abysses, which is nice. And I know you can do the reset value when characters can do some AoE, at least Chamber 1, for example. Tighnari, another character that is single target locked. However, Tighnari's damage output slightly higher, a bit more quick swappy, really, really high damage potential overall. But again, pretty much completely single target locked.
Bruh, how am I supposed to fight like this?
But very, very high damage profile though. Very, very, very impressive damage. Next is going to be Charlotte. If you've used Charlotte, you know what I mean when I say that her heals are mind-blowing. Your entire team can be in the red, and with just one pop of the burst, they're all up to full. She is the best healer. She's the best at healing in the game. I think I even underrated her in my original assessment of her because I said it's pretty much impossible to use Thrilling Tales. But if you have her C4 and you actually focus on getting ER substats on all your pieces and getting a lot of them, she actually can run Thrilling Tales. And so you can use her on a Navia team. You can use her on a Wanderer team to pass on Thrilling Tales. You can use her on a Eula team, right? If you don't have C6 Mika, that Thrilling Tales is going to do more for you than Mika's buff will. You could use her, like, heck, I've used her on a Hu Tao team for some melts and stuff. She's just so good with Farina. You've used her with Novelette. I've used her as an on-fielder for Hyperfridge. Just using her with Farina is so good. And anytime that Krat was even remotely usable,
it's going to be a necessity.
You can squeeze her onto those teams.
For me to have...
even if you just have C0 and you just have to use Harmonious Codex, Kabav is still a very valuable weapon. Oh yeah, Mono Cryo. She gives Layla a run for her money on Mono Cryo.
Night
because you're getting so much cryo particles
during
anyways.
This boss fight.
You still need ER Sands, you still need as many ER substats as you can muster, but if you can get Thrilling Tales on her, now she's
I don't really see any other way around
being a great healer, so yeah, I'm actually a huge fan of Charlotte. Plus, their animations are some of the best in the game, so big Charlotte fan. Next is going to be Ganyu. Oh, this was
sort of absolute
darkness
just really sucks.
Contested placement in my last tier list, and
it's not being able to see where the Ender Dragon is.
Contested placement again. Guys, I don't think Ganyu's that
I mean,
great.
for one, you can't shoot bows of arrows at him anymore.
I've seen some impressive
like
clears.
that.
If you are a sweaty tryhard,
still
you do her cancels, and you have crazy hyper-invested Ganyu, and you play PC, right? Not mobile, not controller, you play PC. I do play controller on my PC. So yeah, if you want to go ahead and say that, oh, he doesn't like Ganyu because he's on controller, that very well could be. I've seen some impressive clears that absolutely warrant a tier 1 placement, but these clears often are from, don't lie to me, they're resulting from a whole lot of resetting. They require an absolutely mind-boggling amount of ER on your Shangling team. They require Zhongli. Zhongli's shield is often not enough to block really heavy attacks from enemies lately if you're standing in Bennett Circle because you're Plighted Pyro. Some of these enemies are melting, some of them are burning, or aggravating. Not aggravating, they're vaporizing you. Sometimes your shield gets broken and now you're just standing there like, what am I doing? You're charging your shot with your Ganyu. Freeze teams are not very good most of the time. I still think she's good. I still think she's very good. This is a very good tier, but she does
very
not,
chaotic boss fight.
Being very choosy with who goes in the excellent broken tier, and Ganyu for me just doesn't make it there. But again, if you play perfectly, you do your resets, I definitely think tier 1 is possible. But I think for the majority of the players, without massive hyper investment, especially tier 2 is. Next, receiving a pretty big demotion is Kirara. I think Kirara's great Dendro applicator. Actually one of the better buffers for aggravate teams being the defensive option with Sapwood Blade, Instructor's Artifact set. Really good character, really good at Nilu Bloom teams. Still a really good character. I'm just kind of changing how I value them. I think, again, the floor has risen, and she has not risen with it. I think she's still very good. But the difference between a character like this and a character like Baiju is much more apparent than it used to be. And similar thing with Yao Yao. I do think Yao Yao
let me unlock the backyard portal.
She does at least have some synergy with Farina, but similar to Sayu, she does need to spend a decent amount of time on field healing up your enemies or your allies. Not as much, right? She's not an on-field character, but overall, she doesn't do enough off-field healing to really be that solo healer. Still a great unit, still good on Nilu teams, still good on Aggravate teams, still good.
Now she's perching low because
not insane. I'm moving down from my last tier list.
I blew it up.
Unfortunately, I still think he's a great pull as like a role consolidating Hydro unit. He has some off-field presence, he has an on-field presence. Everything I said about him in my Ayato guide stands. He's a very flexible character. Jack of all trades, master of none. Unfortunately in Genshin, most people get a lot of characters. You're going to be getting Yelan, you're probably going to be getting Farina, you're probably going to be getting a lot of, maybe a Novelette. You're going to be getting lots of Hydro characters. You might struggle, once you do get those Hydro characters, you might struggle to find a place for your Ayato. If you don't like any of those Hydro characters, or if you just love Ayato, he's an amazing pickup because he can fill so many roles. He can squeeze and work in every abyss. He can 36-star.
Her AI is for the most part the same, though, huh?
I'm
just gonna wait for her to
work in Hyperblade, he works in Nilu, but he's very, very rarely the best option. But I think people who love Ayato, you should be happy because you can just hyper invest into him and use it everywhere. Right? He's not like a character that you can only use on one team. He's a character that works
Cloud,
everywhere, easy to play, very fun, lots of
the first
combos.
mob I do in this world is the Ender Dragon.
Excellent. He's a tier 2 character. Massive blow up. Well, she is an on
Is that
probably
a
the best
fucking
on-fielder
beholder?
healing character, aside from Kokomi, I guess. Because
Man.
she does some damage. She's very comfy to play on field. You can either use her with triple Hydro, with double Hydro Kazuha, with
That's
just
amazing.
Lena, Albedo, Goro, with double Hydro Goro. All of these are going to be good. My Noelle is well invested, but not hyper invested. So well invested didn't cut it. Just way to know. She's not a character that you lightly
I got
invest, and she reaches these peaks. You actually have to have C6. You have to actually invest in her. Otherwise, she will feel somewhat disappointing, probably, if you're expecting her to be cracked at low investment. It's
I'm
not like
not
Charlotte, where you
going
barely
to
need any
credits.
investment in Charlotte to make her really pop off.
Oh,
Noelle
the
needs a
place
fair
is-
bit. But still, once you do get her there, her teams perform awesome. I don't think she belongs in Tier 1. I know some people do. I think that's just because there aren't that many team-wide healers that we have right now, but the fact they have to use her as an on-field team-wide healer just restricts you of so many better on-fielder
No, this place
characters
still
than using an
sucks.
off-field healer like
It's
Baiju
not
or Jean
white anymore,
or
that's
some future
weird.
healer character. Beidou is a great character. She's a little bit niche because her big damage only comes when there's 2, maybe 3 enemies on the field. As soon as you're in very large AoE or in single target, her damage kind of falls off a
Ah,
cliff.
it's
Better in
Obsidian
AoE
instead
than it's a single target for sure. Her aggravate team is very good, and you can use her as a more defensive option for Noelle teams, and she's really, really strong. If she did good single target damage, I would put her in Tier 1,
Never mind.
100%. I don't think Taser is okay, but it's not insane. If you want to learn more about Beidou, I made a great guide on her. I think she's one of the biggest for team slot syndrome characters. Like, often you'd want to use Beidou, but she'd work better as a 5th slot character, and she often gets pushed out. But still really strong, still really like her. Toma is still pretty much the only character that's really used for Burgeon. Please also uses for Burgeon, and can be better, but Toma's resistance to interruption is really, really nice,
What
and
the
being an
heck?
on-field
This
power
is
applicator
terrible.
gives the teams more flexibility. Burgeon teams just aren't insane, though. We kind of need, like, a dedicated Burgeon support of some kind to really
How am I
take them
supposed
to
to
that insane
navigate
level.
this?
But, top of Tier 2, he's still great. You can check out my Toma guide if you want to learn more. At the very bottom of Tier 1, I'm going to Sino. No question about it that Sino's teams are powerful. And
I'm
he
pretty
is
sure you can
flexible.
start
He has
a new
hyper-
game
he has Quicken.
entirely
He can
in
use Farina. He can use
the
Yolan,
end
he
now
can
with
use
these
Zhongli, he
with
can use
these
Baiju,
mods.
But he's probably
Similar
the
to
most
how you can start a new game on the
unit
Nether
in this
when the
role.
Nether
If I was
update came
considering
out.
value, if this was like a value tier list, there's no way he would be in Tier 1 because he has very low account value, but his teams are strong. There's a lot of damage. Venti is a really weird character. His grouping is really strong, but sometimes it just does nothing, and he just
Yeah.
has like Vivi and a tiny bit of energy regeneration, which if that was all he had and didn't have grouping, he would be here or here. Probably
those?
here. But his grouping is very good, but he doesn't trivialize content. He doesn't make content insane. I kind of would consider putting him here, but I still think he's good. If you play him with Farina, you can now build him attack, damage, crit instead of EM, and get a lot more damage out of them that way. If you're building him with Wanderer, you can do the same sort of thing.
Okay.
And RNC Farzan. I definitely wouldn't put him higher than this, but I think this is okay. Zhongli had a very real chance of going down to Tier 2, but he still has, especially with Farina coming out, but he still has very strong. He's very strong on Linny teams, on C0
it's
Novaline
fair.
teams, and on Navia teams. So if those characters didn't really want the resistance interruption and the res shred that he gives, he would very easily go down to Tier 2. But with the new characters coming out, actually really liking him, he still keeps his Tier 1 placement. I could see characters coming out that push him down to Tier 2, just like Venti, but I still think he belongs here. On top of course, being a casual hero, mobile player hero, I think a lot of people really, really like just feeling invincible, feeling that interruption resistance, and they're releasing less. It's very infrequent for an on-field character to have fully uncounterable interruption resistance, so Zhongli still ends up being very valuable a lot of the time for a lot of players. Wriothesley, our newest addition to the Cryo family. Similar to Sino, he's got good teams. Often the teams, like they use Farina. Often these teams will be, not quite as good as other teams. I still prefer Ayaka, but I'll admit my Ayaka is better invested than my Wriothesley, but I definitely think that they belong in the same tier. I think Wriothesley's very strong. I think he has some nice pros. Is that his damage is infusion based instead of burst based, so that you have a lot more flexibility in rotations, finishing off enemies. He can be easier to play. I don't think he has any teams that are like super insane, and that's what keeps him being held back from being higher, but I still think his teams are very good, and he does a lot of damage on those teams. Klee is a character that's very underrated very often, and actually got a pretty sizable buff from Furina. Furina will vape her hits on the Klee team. She is pretty much a worse Linny, so if you look at characters less in a vacuum and more in terms of relative to other characters, I could see you putting her in tier 2. I also don't like the way she plays. I don't find her fun or engaging. I find her clunky and annoying to play, but I have gotten some really good clears with her. Her clear times have impressed me, so I don't recommend picking her up for power at all, but if you like her, you can make her work. She's really, really strong. What can I say about Yamika? Her aggravate teams are amazing. She works great in Alhaitham spread, Tagnari spread. You can use her as a flex pick for like Navia teams, or you can use her on Taser. You can use her with Raiden. You can use her with Furina. You can use her as like a Sino replacement. I like her a lot. I think she's great. I think she's sort of held back by her normal attacks not being that fun to play and her animation time being really long. And I know a lot of people just don't like the way she plays, but I do. I think she's really fun to play. I think that once you get used to her skills, you can use them to dodge enemies, and she's not that bad to play for me. And whether you're using it as an on-fielder or dual DPS with Alhaitham or like a driver for official, definitely a tier 1 character. Shenhe, I keep loving Shenhe. I love her with Ayaka. The front load that she gives to Ayaka is critical in these trying times where bosses have invulnerability phases, you have shorter DPS windows. Being able to front load more of your Ayaka's burst damage, very, very valuable, especially the more you invest into your Ayaka. And she doesn't just work with Ayaka, obviously. You can use her to carry someone like Rosari or Kai or Chang'un. She works with Wriothesley, maybe not on his very best teams, but my favorite Wriothesley teams use Shenhe. I don't necessarily think she's like a super good pull for most players. Ayaka, one of my favorite DPS to play. I think obviously she works great.
How am I supposed to get my Elytra?
I think she's really, really underrated for bossing.
Thankfully killing the Ender Dragon gives an Elytra now.
Boss chambers, I love
with my
Mono
data
Cryo.
packs.
I almost like Mono Cryo more than I do her freeze teams. I almost like her for bossing more than I do for AoE chambers, because AoE chambers have a lot of junk and annoying stuff for grouping. Her front load is crazy. She does so much damage in such a short window. The caveat is that she does have to be very well invested. Fortunately, Finale of the Deep is a great free-to-play option that is much closer to her signature than Amanoma was, but you do have to have good artifacts. If you don't have good artifacts, and I think a lot of people don't, then she could be even tier 2. So a lot of people blame me for overrating Ayaka. I don't think so. But yeah, she does need good artifacts, and she does need good teams, and that's why she's not higher on the tier 1 list, right? That's why she's comparatively lower than a lot of other characters are going to be. Next is Child. I do think very highly of Child. I did move him down a fair bit from where I rated him before, and that's just because the crazy clears that see, the speedrun level clears, they're pretty hard to do. They require high investment, high skill, and often a lot of resets and RNG. I do think he's really good. I think he's a top tier, excellent DPS, but I think it's kind of hard.
I'm not going to bother looking for
maybe
an
not the average player, but even the above average player, the good player, the hardcore masher. That's kind of how I describe myself. Is I'm a masher at heart, but I take the game seriously, and his stuff is hard to do. But if you really know what you're doing, you can push Child to the top of tier 1 for sure. Probably going to get a lot of hate for this. This is where I'm putting Kokomi. I think Kokomi is very good. I think Hydro is a great element. I think being a team-wide healer is good. I think she'd be a lot better if she was a bigger team-wide healer from off-field, because basically to work properly with Furina, she has to be on-field, and on-field, Triple Hydro is awesome. It's a great team. It's a very comfortable team, very fun, does a lot of damage. It's not my favorite double Hydro team, but it's nice that it has that grouping. I like it better than Taser for sure, and she does a lot of personal damage on that team, which is awesome. She still works amazingly with Nilou, amazing best in slot with Ayaka. If you want to put her closer to the top of tier 1, I could definitely see that. But I think there's just so many Hydro characters these days, and oftentimes your healer slot is better off to be a different element. It's better off being Jean, or it's better off being someone else. If you have a neither healer, so often you're going to be using a shielder. I think a lot of the best teams these days just don't use Kokomi and don't fit Kokomi. I think similar to Ayato, she's very flexible. You can use her in Hyper Bloom, you can use her in Vaporize, you can use her in Freeze, you can use her in all this stuff, but whereas her actual power level, I think it's right here. Still excellent, still really good. But I know some people truly think she's a broken character, and I just don't think she brings the offense to be a broken character. Like, Bennett heals, and he heals enough to actually work with Furina, but he also gives a massive attack buff. Kokomi can give Thrilling Tales, but then she's foregoing a lot of ER or a lot of personal damage. You know, Kuki heals, not enough to work with Furina, but if you use, Prototype Amber on someone else, then it is enough with Furina. And she procs Hyper Blooms, which do a ton of damage.